Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dark Horse, General Larry O. Spencer and His Journey from the Horseshoe to the Pentagon, by General Larry O. Spencer, U.S. Air Force, retired. Narrated by Calvin Robinson. Preface. There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. Maya Angelou. On September 9, 1953, I came into existence as a dark horse, a contender with little or no chance of succeeding. Born an African American in the early 1950s, on a tough inner-city southeast Washington, D.C. street called the Horseshoe, made me a dark horse. Dad was an enlisted man in the U.S. Army and worked 2 jobs to support our family of 8. Neighborhood kids teased me because Dad wore a prosthetic hook in place of his amputated left hand, an injury he received during the Korean War. Mom had not completed high school and had no driver's license. Both had migrated from Southern Virginia, where Jim Crow laws and the separate but equal doctrine dominated their early lives and shaped their life perspective. We shared our 900-square-foot duplex home with roaches and mice. I walked to school each day with my head on a swivel in close watch for an unprovoked fight. I was a poor student in school. I was trapped inside a cocoon of low self-esteem and poor self-worth. Teachers passed me along to the next grade with the hope I would do better. If they only knew how desperately I wanted to do better. I needed help. I needed guidance. I needed a mentor, but there were none. Positive role models were few, and negative images and stereotypes were abundant. As an introvert, I felt isolated. My outlook for a meaningful future was desolate. I had many personal struggles during my youth. I struggled to make sense of a society that labeled me a minority or worse. I didn't understand how skin color could determine one's future. My escape from a lack of hope was food, so I struggled with my weight and self-image. The neighborhood kids called me Fat Boy. Worse, some of my family ridiculed me over my appearance. Only in hindsight do I understand their intentions were pure, but at the time the pain of the personal derision was indescribably deep. I don't blame them now. I refuse to believe they knew how I cringed when I was compared with relatives they felt I should be more like. But during my youth, the constant expressions of repulsion were like a dagger in my spirit. Sports ruled on the Horseshoe. As a young African-American male, being good at sports was expected, and I was good. Rain or shine, I played football and basketball every day. My dream was to play in the National Football League. That was supposed to be my ticket out of the Horseshoe. For me, like most of my friends, that ticket never got punched. In stark contrast, academic acuity was eschewed, and those who excelled in school were accused of acting white. Fighting also ruled in my neighborhood, and I had my share of fights, some triumphant and others not. Negotiation and compromise were viewed as weak. Those not skilled with their fists were labeled punks and faced the scorn of neighborhood bullies. There was little disposable income in the home, so if I wanted money, I had to earn it. I developed a knack and the passion for saving money and seeking efficiency. I hung on for dear life to the back of a city trash truck collecting garbage. I stripped and waxed floors in a department store. I delivered newspapers on my paper route for the Washington Post and now defunct Washington News. I cut grass, washed cars, and shoveled snow in winter for neighbors on the Horseshoe. I set up my own lemonade stand and was robbed on the very first day. I witnessed a host of significant events during my lifetime that molded and shaped who I am today. As a kid, I attended the Martin Luther King Jr. March on Washington in 1963. I watched the Beatles perform on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964. I watched Walter Cronkite report body counts from the Vietnam War on the evening news. I watched the burning of my city of birth following the tragic assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. That same year, I watched my mom cry the day Senator Robert Bobby Kennedy was murdered. I witnessed the genius of Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock in 1969. I watched in horror as Ohio National Guardsmen shot and killed 4 unarmed students protesting at Kent State University. 2 significant events changed my life trajectory. First, and quite by chance, I enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. That event was neither planned nor anticipated and is inexplicable even today. Second, while enlisted in the Air Force, I obtained my college degree. I have since been told that education is the great equalizer. For me, obtaining a Bachelor of Science degree was more than an equalizer. It was a life-altering event. Enlisting in the Air Force took me out of the neighborhood and mental captivity that I believed offered no escape. Through the Air Force, I lost weight, gained confidence, and discovered an innate talent to lead. Obtaining a college degree opened a world for me that I could not imagine. A degree gave me a sense of self-worth I didn't believe existed. I discovered I was as smart as anyone else and in some cases maybe smarter. A college degree provided the opportunity to become a commissioned Air Force officer, which placed me in positions of responsibility. It afforded me influence and credibility. Whereas my enlisted years allowed me to run, becoming an officer allowed me to soar high above a life that I wanted so desperately to leave behind, to accomplish things my parents could not even dream about. Over time, with God's help, I was able to achieve what most believed was unachievable. My life journey and my Air Force career were anything but orthodox and were not a blueprint I would recommend to others. I had to overcome a substandard inner-city educational system to eventually attend classes at Harvard University. As an airman, I endured the racial tensions of the 1970s. I had to compete for senior Air Force positions that were previously dominated by pilots and considered unattainable for a career financial manager. I took on tough, critical jobs that no one of color had held before. I supported 3 major wars. My journey was uphill, to be sure, but I thrived on the climb. I began my Air Force journey as an airman, pay grade E1. I entered military service having barely graduated from high school. I retired from the Air Force as a 4-star general with 2 master's degrees. In my youth, one of my first jobs was slinging large trash containers into the smelly hull of a trash compactor. My final job in the Air Force was Vice Chief of Staff, the second highest-ranking military member in the Air Force. In my youth, I was one of a million inner-city kids on the road to nowhere. In the Air Force, I was one of only 9 African-American 4-star generals in Air Force history and one of 2 African-American 4-stars who was not a pilot. I was, and continue to be, the only Air Force officer in Air Force history with the primary career area of financial management to be promoted to 4 stars. Throughout those years, I had many people suggest that I write about my experiences to serve as motivation for others. That was a humbling consideration that gave me pause, because I did not think my journey was worthy of inspiration. After speaking publicly about my life experiences, however, it was evident I had a story others wanted to hear. I have had thousands of people tell me my life experience now serves as motivation for them. I have had hundreds of airmen say they want to follow in my footsteps. Those comments are sobering and certainly not deserved. But if writing about my life experience can help just one person, I am honored to record my journey. There are many people who I call friends who think they know who I am. In reality, they have no idea about the challenges of a once dark horse who endured and thrived on a journey from the Horseshoe to the Pentagon. Chapter 1. The Horseshoe. I am a reflection of my community. Tupac Shakur. It was my first day in junior high school, and I was sweating bullets. I learned to trash talk like everyone else in the neighborhood, and even had a few brief skirmishes. But a real public fight? Never. My stomach churned over the conflicts going through my head. The conflicts of not wanting to fight versus looking like a punk in front of my friends. In my neighborhood, there was no worse label than that of a punk. It meant you were scared. It meant you were weak. It meant you were soft. Above all, wearing that label would make one a prime target of neighborhood bullies. It was gym class at John Philip Sousa Junior High School, an all-black school in Southeast D.C. An older teenager trying to impress his friends walked up to me and said, "Punk, get out of my way," and shoved me to the side. At once I had a dilemma. My mind and my heart wanted to simply give him space and move on. But my pride had a different idea. As a small crowd gathered, in the heat of the moment, my pride pushed ahead and I said, "No, punk, you move." Those 4 words escaped through my lips before reason could intercede. That short but formidable statement put my existence into suspended animation. As my heartbeat quickened, the crowd grew larger and louder as my opponent pushed me again. Subconsciously, I knew the right thing was to walk away, but the pressure of backing down in front of what seemed like the entire student body was too intense. If I walked away now, I could not face my friends. This was bigger than me. This was my reputation as well as the reputation of my neighborhood on the line. As I regained my balance, my opponent laughed, thinking that I would certainly not tangle with an older student. Guided mostly by fear and without calculation, eyes closed, I clenched my fist and swung as hard as I could, and I landed a punch squarely on his jaw. The sound of my fist connecting with his face startled me. It is a sound that movie special effects don't quite capture. I had never punched anyone in the face before, and I didn't like it. I desperately wanted to take back my thoughtless overreaction, but it was too late. I had just entered into an abyss with no predictable end. The crowd erupted in a chorus of "ooh," followed by a pregnant pause as they became transfixed on my opponent's next move. The look on his face said it all. He was stunned and in disbelief as he gathered himself for battle. I instinctively raised my hands up to the fighting position when, lucky for me, our grizzled and very large gym teacher stepped between us, broke up the fight and the crowd. My sense of relief was palpable as my trash-talking was silenced. Conversely, my shaken opponent was boiling mad. I had embarrassed him in front of his boys. Despite the presence of our gym teacher, he yelled out that he would see me after school to finish the fight. That very public threat launched me into an impenetrable fog. Rumors of the impending fight spread like wildfire, and nothing got our student body animated more than talk of an after-school fight. The more talk I heard about the fight, the more I panicked. I concocted a scheme to fake an illness to leave school early. I visited the school clinic, but despite my accelerated pulse, my temperature was normal, and there were no visible signs of illness, so the nurse sent me back to class. I seriously considered finding my opponent and quietly apologizing, but word would certainly get out that I backed down. The truth is, I wanted to back down. The truth is, I had never been more afraid in my life. Just up the street from our school was an area where after-school fights took place. I had witnessed many fights there, but never thought I would be in the actual arena. I toyed with the idea of taking an alternate route home. I knew full well, however, that my neighborhood friends would see right through that scheme and expose the gripping fear I felt inside. Most school days always dragged on forever, but on this day, the school bell marking the end of the day came all too soon. I was so anxious I could hardly breathe. My heart was pounding. I tried to maintain a calm outer demeanor, but inside I was nauseated. As I walked out of the school entrance and headed along my normal route home, I noticed a few students gathering around the after-school fight area in anticipation. My mind raced as I played out the fight scene in my mind. Would his punches hurt? Would I cry in front of the crowd? How would the fight start? How would the fight end? As I continued up the hill, my anxiety eased a bit, as I could not locate my opponent. Could this be true? Was this smack-talking upperclassman as terrified as I was? Whatever the reason, my opponent did not show. With a brief prayer of thanks, I ignored the crowd, quickened my step, and hurried home. The next day, my opponent and I briefly crossed paths, but neither of us said a word. It was obvious to me he did not want to fight, and I assume it was just as obvious to him that I wanted to move on as well. Fortune was with me for my first fight in the hood. Unfortunately, I wasn't so lucky during subsequent encounters. As a dark horse, I entered the race of life with no definitive path for success. Life as an African American during the 1950s and 1960s was tough. As a black youth, I felt devalued. Those blacks deemed successful by society were entertainers or professional athletes, so I chose to be a professional athlete. Adults in the neighborhood complained about working hard every day but never getting ahead. Yet we all witnessed pimps and numbers runners driving fancy cars and dressed to the nines. Attending school each day was something I did, not a means to an end. Life did not exist outside my neighborhood, and I felt confined. That confinement was socioeconomic and emotional rather than physical. Yet that was my life and the life of my friends on the Horseshoe. The Horseshoe. 46th Place in southeast Washington, D.C. is literally shaped like a horseshoe. For those familiar with the city, 46th Place is about a mile and a half south of the infamous Shrimp Boat, a landmark restaurant built the year I was born. My father, Alfonso, was born on a farm in Red House, Virginia in 1927. Like his brother before him and his brothers that followed, to escape the farm, young Alonzo enlisted in the U.S. Army immediately following high school in 1946. During the Korean War, Dad earned a Purple Heart when his left hand was amputated due to wounds he suffered. Despite his handicap, he remained in the Army for a full career. My mother, Selma, was born in 1934 in her home in Cullen, Virginia, although the specific date is in some dispute. My grandmother told Mom her birthday was September 4th, 1934, which is the date she celebrated every year. However, at age 17, when Mom requested her birth certificate, the date showed August 3rd, 1934. Speculation is that the midwife that assisted with her birth simply made a mistake when recording her birth date at the local courthouse. Mom remained resolute that her mother was the ultimate authority. So while her official birth date displayed on her Social Security card, taxes, driver's license, and so on still shows August 3rd, she continues to celebrate her birth in September. Dad purchased our house on the Horseshoe in 1955 for $13,500. At the time, he felt the $75 monthly payments were outrageous. He also hated the 19-mile one-way commuting distance to work at Forest Glen, Maryland, which was an annex to Walter Reed Army Medical Center, where Dad recovered from his war injury. Given that the monthly basic pay for an E4 in 1955 was $159.90, I certainly sympathized with his displeasure. On the other hand, with gas at 29 cents per gallon, the trade-off of driving distance and mortgage payment was a good deal for the times. Mom had researched homes closer to Forest Glen. She was impressed with the school system in Montgomery County, Maryland. At the time, though, real estate agents would not show those homes to colored families, and she rationalized they could not afford to live there anyway. The Horseshoe is lined with brick duplex homes with 3 levels. Including all 3 floors, the square footage totaled about 900 feet. If you stretched out your arms, your palms would nearly touch each side of the walls in the very small, bowling lane-shaped kitchen. Mousetraps lined the floor under the sink, and small brown roaches scurried along the tabletops and inside the cabinets. We watched a 12-inch black and white television with rabbit ear antennas, and there was a small but noisy portable air conditioning unit in the front living room window. While watching TV one evening, I told Mom that something had just run across the room. She looked over at me and casually answered, "Don't worry, it's just mice." Our family of 8 shared 3 small bedrooms and a single bathroom on the upper level. I shared a room with my 3 brothers, Leland, Keith, and Charles, nicknamed Mutt. We slept on 2 bunk beds, and there was a single dresser for clothes. My sisters, Robin and Kate, shared the second small bedroom. My parents' bedroom was at the front of the house and, as was the fashion of the time, established by the I Love Lucy show during the 1950s, had 2 single beds. Our home had a small front yard with a cement front porch where neighbors sat in the evenings and talked across the chain-link fence. The backyard where my siblings and I played and where Mom hung freshly washed clothes to dry was a bit larger. On a gorgeous day when I was 5, Mom called me in for lunch. I gulped down my bologna sandwich quickly so I could head back outdoors to play. With the last bite of my sandwich still in my mouth, I charged full speed toward the front door, which was open, exposing the glass storm door. As I had done 100 times before, I raised my right hand to push the door handle, but this time the glass door was locked. My momentum carried me right through the glass door and onto the concrete front porch. Mom, terrified by the sound of shattering glass, raced to my rescue. When she reached me, I was lying on the front porch, bleeding and covered with glass. Miraculously, other than a few cuts and bruises, I was not seriously injured. Dad, however, was not amused when he arrived home from work to find the broken front door. Despite its modest size, our house was the hub of activity for relatives and friends. Uncles, aunts, and cousins were constant fixtures during weekends and holidays. While my extended paternal and maternal families were influential in my upbringing, they could not have been more dissimilar. Mom's family members were expressive, and their bid whist card games in our living room were legendary and filled with trash talk. They were raised poor but were full of life and laughter. My Uncle Jim worked as a janitor in a department store. My Aunt Ruth worked as a maid, and my Uncle Leroy worked in a liquor store. Despite their modest economic means, they were fun to be around and role models that I admired greatly. Although Dad's family was also raised with little income, their farm produced most of what they needed. Dad's siblings were generally more formally educated and were raised with a strong work ethic by my authoritarian grandfather. Several of my aunts attended college while my uncles all entered the military. My Aunt Jenny was a nurse and my Aunt Fay was an educator. My Uncle Andrew rose to the top enlisted rank of E9 in the U.S. Army, and Uncle James served in the U.S. Navy before working more than 30 years for Bethlehem Steel Corporation in Baltimore. Although they were also fun to be around, they were more stoic than Mom's siblings, a trait I inherited. Among the sea of negative images I endured in my youth, those family gatherings provided a much-needed refuge. Growing up, Dad never told me he loved me or otherwise expressed feelings or emotion. His own upbringing, which was mostly influenced by his father, conditioned him to be this way as Dad conditioned me. Some of my siblings were bothered by his lack of personal expression, but I was not. As a parent, I came to realize that parents and their offspring often have unrealistic expectations of each other. Family life is often portrayed in movies or television as void of imperfection. I've come to realize there is no perfect parent or perfect child, and everyone is different. And I suppose being an introvert helped me understand that people are often misunderstood, and for some, expressing personal feelings, even to a parent or child, is really difficult. I never had doubts about Dad's caring and desire for all his offspring to do well in life, so my approach was to cut him a break. Besides, it's easy for me to say Dad never said he loved me, because I realize I never said those words to him. Clearly, the loss of Dad's left hand during the Korean War was a significant event in his life. Yet he never discussed the circumstances surrounding the injury. To his credit, he never let his handicap limit any of his activities, including tossing around a football or baseball with me in the backyard. I don't know if he felt inadequate when he mishandled a fast pitch or struggled to throw a perfect football spiral, but he never once let the loss of an extremity limit his life or his activities with his family. Dad tried his best to attend most of my sports events at school. He occasionally brought with him one of his best friends from his Army service, Mr. George Crocker, who was a great family friend and role model. A special treat was the rare occasion when we attended a professional football or baseball game. Dad was a huge Washington Redskins, now Washington football team fan, and I enjoyed watching him cheer and interact with fellow fans. An oddity for me was to watch him drink the pocketful of miniature liquor bottles that he referred to as antifreeze for the cold temperatures. Likewise, his explanation for paying exorbitant prices for beer during Washington Senators baseball games was that they helped him stay cool during the warm temperatures. The loss of Dad's left hand affected more than his ability to throw a ball. Throughout my entire childhood, when neighborhood friends asked why my dad wore a prosthetic hook in place of his hand, I was ashamed to tell the truth, which was that I didn't have a clue. Instead, I made up elaborate stories that would rival some of the most famous war scenes in a movie. As a youngster, having a dad with a missing hand and not knowing the circumstances surrounding the loss was difficult and confusing. So much so that at 12 years old in 1965, when my mother was pregnant with my youngest sister, Kate, I was too embarrassed to ask Mom if Kate would be born missing her left hand. Similarly, Mom rarely expressed words of tenderness or support. My siblings and I understood that both parents loved us, but the actual words were not spoken. I sensed that Mom wanted a more expressive and communicative family dynamic, but like Dad, she had never experienced those kinds of family interactions growing up. With 6 children, it was all she could do to keep her own head above water. In addition to serving on active duty as an Army soldier, Dad worked a part-time job as a bartender at the enlisted club. So since Mom did not have her driver's license, she was essentially isolated on the Horseshoe all day with the 6 of us. My parents never talked to me about sex or anything else of real consequence. Mirroring their own upbringings, they believed children should not be involved with grown folks' business. As the oldest, I probably spent the most alone time with Dad since we both enjoyed fishing and sports. Waking at 3 o'clock a.m., we made the 3-hour drive to the Delaware coast along with several of his friends. Following another 2-hour boat ride into the ocean, we fished the entire day. The trash talk and profane language between him and his friends was enough to make a sailor blush. Our time spent fishing and attending sporting events, however, represented the most real conversation we had. As an introvert, the basement in our house was my solace and where I spent hours listening to the Motown sound on my small transistor radio. A wall separated the rear area of the basement that contained a washing machine and workbench. I can still remember the sound of the swish-swash of the 1940s vintage Maytag wringer machine. Mom hand-fed the washed clothes through the rolling pin like wringers that squeezed out the excess water. She then carefully guided the damp clothes into a plastic basket on the floor. When the wash was complete, she hung the clothes on a clothesline in the backyard and secured them with small wooden clothespins until dry, where more than once our clothes were stolen right off the clothesline, clothespins and all. The final stage was hours of ironing and pressing to make hand-me-down clothes look good as new. Inner City Blues. Activity on the Horseshoe was constant. Young girls jumped double-dutch rope and played hopscotch on the sidewalk. Boys played sports in the street during the day and hung out on the corner at night. No one wanted to miss the weekend house parties where the latest Motown sounds would spin on 45 RPM records. During summer months, the jingle of the ice cream truck was like an elixir for those with 10 cents to spend. When temperatures really got hot, the older kids would use a large wrench to pop open a fire hydrant so the younger kids could run through the strong, steady stream of water. Dogs fighting in the street were common, and cats of unknown origin were abundant. Joning or talking trash to each other was a popular pastime on the Horseshoe. When things got really serious, the old reliable refrain, "Yo mama," was pulled out of reserve. In hindsight, I suppose it was an early form of rapping because spitting poetic and rhythmic rhymes about one's looks, habits, or family members was a true art form and mostly good-natured. But things could quickly get heated if someone felt particularly offended. Joning was particularly painful for me because of the prosthetic hook Dad wore. Kids can be cruel, but the Captain Hook jokes about an injury Dad suffered while serving in the Korean War were particularly harsh and hurtful. Sports and music dominated life on the Horseshoe, and unfortunately, academic prowess took a back seat. As a young black kid, being good at sports was expected, and achieving academic success would get one labeled a nerd or the accusation of acting white, which in hindsight was an absurd.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?